Hello everyone, and welcome to the Complex Cinema channel. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing and giving this video a thumbs up. Today, we are going to be discussing the movie Fated Hearts Episode 1. The opening scene immediately immerses us in the high-stakes world of a bustling city, centering on a young woman named Mei Lin. Her life is clearly defined by the demands of her career. She's an ambitious executive at a major tech firm, a path she's clearly clawed her way up, demonstrating a sharp intellect that commands respect in the usually male-dominated boardroom. We see glimpses of her intense focus during a presentation, the kind of singular dedication that speaks to years spent sacrificing personal comfort for professional ascent. This drive is contrasted sharply with her internal state, perhaps a subtle weariness beneath the polished exterior that successful corporate climbers often carry. The narrative swiftly shifts focus to reveal our male lead, Jian Li. Jian is established not as a corporate titan, but as a master artisan, specifically a renowned restorer of antique calligraphy and paintings. His studio is a haven of quiet reverence, filled with the scent of aged paper and ink, a stark contrast to Mei Lin's gleaming glass office. Jian's dedication mirrors Mei Lin's, though his world revolves around preservation rather than innovation. He approaches his work with painstaking detail, a reflection perhaps of a deeper, more philosophical connection to history and beauty. An artistic temperament likely nurtured by early exposure to traditional masters, maybe a legacy passed down through his family. Their worlds collide unexpectedly, not over a merger or a sensitive business deal, but through a seemingly trivial bureaucratic error concerning a piece of disputed inherited property, perhaps a small ancestral tea house that both parties lay claim to, albeit for vastly different reasons. Mei Lin views it purely as an asset, a tangle to be efficiently resolved so it doesn't impede her schedule. Jian sees it as the last tangible link to his past, a sanctuary he feels compelled to protect. The initial encounters are predictably fraught with tension. Mei Lin, armed with legal documents and concise, efficient language, finds Jian's impassioned, almost poetic defense of the property frustratingly inefficient. Jian, meanwhile, perceives Mei Lin as cold, ruthlessly materialistic, and entirely disconnected from the true value of things, the emotional weight that transcends monetary worth. Their conversations are battles waged across a chasm of differing priorities. A key turning point involves a shared necessity. Perhaps the property requires immediate, costly repairs that neither can ignore, forcing a temporary, uneasy truce. It's here, in the shared space of decay and potential restoration, that the cracks in their initial judgments begin to show. Watching Jian delicately handle a damaged scroll, Mei Lin might pause, realizing that the precision he applies to art is the same level of intensity she applies to market forecasting. Similarly, Jian observes Mei Lin expertly negotiating with difficult contractors, seeing a competence that suggests her ambition isn't merely greed, but a formidable capability. The episode closes not with resolution, but with a subtle acknowledgement that beneath the professional armor, both carry a profound sense of responsibility and a deeply rooted work ethic, setting the stage for a complicated dance between ambition and sentiment. The tension established during those initial, forced collaborations in the dusty tea house setting begins to breed a strange sort of professional respect, a grudging admiration that surfaces only when the other is momentarily out of sight. Mei Lin, accustomed to delegating and leading from the front, finds herself unexpectedly observing Jian's methods. She notes how his years spent studying the minute brushstrokes of ancient masters, perhaps inspired by a childhood spent in the shadow of a demanding art historian father, have honed his patience to an almost superhuman degree. This patience is a commodity Mei Lin finds desperately lacking in her own high-octane existence, where quarterly reports demand instant gratification. She might catch herself tapping her foot impatiently during a long discussion about the correct humidity levels for preserving a particularly fragile piece of silk, yet simultaneously marvel at the sheer dedication involved. Jian's perspective shifts just as subtly, albeit slower. He initially viewed Mei Lin's tailored suits and relentless efficiency as evidence of a soul hollowed out by capitalism. However, while overseeing the complicated process of replacing a section of the ancient tiled roof, he witnesses Mei Lin take a crisis call, a major software glitch threatening a product launch, and handle the ensuing chaos with a startling clarity. Her voice, usually clipped and distant when addressing him, becomes sharp, decisive, and utterly in control as she manages high-level engineers across different time zones. Jian realizes that her ruthlessness in business is merely the flip side of her formidable skill set. She doesn't just manage projects, she masters them, much like he masters the application of aged pigment. This competence, this mastery in her chosen field, begins to chip away at his romanticized view of the past versus the present. Their interactions, while still laced with barbed comments about asset valuation versus historical preservation, start incorporating slivers of personal revelation. One evening, while they are both working late, Mei Lin reviewing contracts by the glow of a desk lamp, Jian carefully reattaching a shattered piece of pottery under a magnifying lamp. Mei Lin mentions, almost offhandedly, the pressure she feels to continuously outperform her previous successes, hinting at a demanding legacy of her own. Perhaps the need to prove herself worthy of the executive position she earned against overwhelming odds. Jian, who understands pressure through the weight of expectation tied to preserving cultural heritage, doesn't immediately offer sympathy, but offers a pragmatic observation, noting that pressure, whether from the market or history, requires the same steady hand to manage the inevitable stress fractures. This moment, characterized by shared exhaustion rather than shared joy, serves as a vital, unspoken bridge between the art of preservation and the art of corporate ascension. The lingering question remains whether these two vastly different paths can ever truly converge without one path demanding the complete abandonment of the other. The quiet acknowledgments exchanged during those late nights begin to carve out a small, shared territory in their otherwise opposing lives. Mei Lin finds herself lingering near Jian's workspace even when she has urgent emails demanding attention, drawn by the almost meditative quality of his labor. She starts noticing the small, personal touches he adds to his environment. A perfectly placed sprig of bamboo in a simple vase, the way he always drinks his tea from a specific, slightly chipped porcelain cup. These details reflect an attention to nuance that she realizes is utterly absent from her own meticulously planned, yet sterile, executive suite. She begins to wonder if her relentless pursuit of the next big acquisition has left her blind to the quiet beauty embedded in daily existence, something Jian's inherited appreciation for history clearly imbues in him. Jian, spurred by Mei Lin's unexpected professional disclosures, starts to probe deeper into the anxieties that fuel her drive. He notices the faint tremor in her hand when she signs documents late at night, a tiny betrayal of the iron composure she projects during board meetings. He recalls reading about the rigorous, almost Spartan training regimens of high-level finance executives, recognizing that her ambition isn't born of simple greed, but perhaps a desperate need for control in a world that often feels chaotic. He realizes that her drive to acquire and build might be a powerful, if flawed, attempt to build a foundation so solid that nothing, no market crash, no rival, can ever shake her sense of security, a need perhaps stemming from early instability that her current success belies. The catalyst for a more pronounced shift occurs when a significant challenge emerges concerning the disputed property. Perhaps a powerful local developer, seeing the old tea house as prime real estate, launches an aggressive legal maneuver to seize it quickly. This forces Mei Lin and Jian into an unprecedented joint operation. Mei Lin uses her network to rapidly research the developer's vulnerabilities, employing tactics of corporate warfare she excels at: leaks, preemptive injunctions, and strategic information placement. Jian, in turn, uses his deep knowledge of the local community, tapping into the sentiments of the older residents who value the tea house's historical significance, organizing subtle but effective public support that pressures local regulators. During a tense, all-night strategy session in the drafty drawing room of the tea house, fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer adrenaline, their defenses finally falter. When Mei Lin successfully thwarts a particularly nasty attempt by the developer to block access, she lets out a genuine, relieved laugh, a sound Jian has never heard before, raw and surprisingly unrestrained. In response, Jian, exhausted but triumphant, finds himself reaching out, not to argue, but simply to steady her as she sags against a doorway. For a fleeting moment, the professional masks dissolve. They are simply two highly capable individuals who just won a difficult battle, recognizing the shared fire within each other. The realization dawns that their differing approaches, her aggressive forward momentum, and his careful, anchoring historical knowledge, are perfectly complementary, two halves of a formidable whole, suggesting that perhaps their futures, however uncertain, might be better navigated together than apart. The shared adrenaline rush from successfully fending off the aggressive developer leaves an indelible mark, shifting the dynamic from adversarial negotiation to something resembling a partnership forged under fire. Mei Lin, catching herself leaning into Jian's steady presence during that moment of relief, feels an unfamiliar warmth, a vulnerability she quickly tries to smother, fearful of the weakness such attachment implies in her world. She finds herself looking for reasons to revisit the tea house, rationalizing it as necessary oversight of structural repairs, though increasingly the need is to observe Jian at work again, to feel the quietude of his focus settle her own perpetually racing mind. She even starts bringing him specific, high-quality tools for his restoration work, small, precision instruments that she knows are orders of magnitude better than the slightly worn ones he possesses, a silent offering of her professional best to his artistic domain. Jian, for his part, finds his ingrained skepticism towards the modern corporate world severely tested. Mei Lin's operational efficiency in crisis management wasn't just effective, it was elegant in its ruthlessness. He sees now that her strategic mind, which he once dismissed as purely acquisitive, is capable of deep loyalty and powerful defense when something she values is threatened. And he realizes with a start that he has unconsciously begun to value her presence. He notices details about her that transcend her CEO image. The faint shadow of exhaustion under her eyes that no amount of perfect makeup can entirely hide, and the rare moments when her guard slips, revealing an underlying idealism that she works tirelessly to suppress. He begins to see her career not as a flight from depth, but as an attempt to build a fortress around a sensitive core, much like he preserves ancient artifacts under layers of protective varnish. This fragile truce is tested when the legal dispute over the deed resurfaces, this time complicated by an unexpected cultural heritage clause that Jian's lawyers unearthed, a clause that requires documented historical use and public endorsement, playing directly into his strengths. Mei Lin, momentarily stepping back from the legal trenches, becomes his advocate in the world of finance and media. She utilizes her considerable contacts to orchestrate positive press coverage, not focusing on the property's monetary value, but on its significance to the city's cultural tapestry, a narrative she frames with surprising sensitivity, clearly influenced by Jian's earlier passion. It's a fascinating role reversal, the artisan leveraging the executive's machinery for sentiment, and the executive wielding her power to protect a piece of history. During a key public hearing, Mei Lin presents data charts detailing the economic impact of preserving the area's heritage versus short-sighted development, juxtaposing cold, hard facts with Jian's heartfelt, yet grounded, testimony about generational continuity. Watching her speak with such passion about something that isn't directly tied to her company's quarterly earnings, Jian feels a profound shift. It's not just about the tea house anymore. It's about seeing the complex, multifaceted person behind the corporate veneer. The episode concludes with a momentary shared silence after they win the immediate legal battle, standing outside the courthouse in the late afternoon light. Mei Lin glances at Jian, a genuine, unforced smile touching her lips, and for the first time, neither feels the need to rush back to their respective worlds. The shared victory has created an undeniable gravity between them, suggesting that the resolution of their dispute might only be the beginning of a much more complicated, intertwined future. The successful defense of the tea house temporarily secures their joint ownership, forcing an official agreement regarding its shared management, a document that feels far more binding than any contract Mei Lin has ever drafted. This new reality necessitates regular scheduled meetings, ostensibly to discuss maintenance budgets and historical preservation grants, but increasingly serving as thinly veiled opportunities for them to simply exist in each other's orbit. The formality of their initial disagreements gives way to a rhythm of comfortable, often challenging, intellectual sparring. Mei Lin begins taking personal interest in Jian's conservation projects outside the tea house. She accompanies him to a museum acquisition event where he is presenting a newly restored, extremely rare landscape scroll. She observes how the scholarly community treats him, with a deference reserved for those who speak the silent language of the past. Seeing him command the respect of seasoned historians, she feels a strange surge of pride, an emotion entirely separate from any corporate success. She starts asking detailed questions about chemical aging processes and the ethics of restoration, displaying a curiosity that surprises even herself, demonstrating that the analytical part of her mind is capable of engaging with beauty, not just commerce. Conversely, Jian finds himself drawn into the periphery of Mei Lin's professional life, often waiting for her in the quiet, minimalist reception area of her firm. He watches the stream of supplicants and ambitious subordinates flow past, realizing the sheer volume of responsibility she carries. One day, she is cornered by a senior partner who attempts to undermine her authority on a major overseas merger. Jian doesn't intervene directly, but his mere steady, calm presence seems to anchor Mei Lin. When the partner finally retreats, Mei Lin offers Jian a look of profound gratitude. Later, she confesses that the pressure of that single negotiation was akin to handling an artifact so fragile that a single wrong move could shatter centuries of work. This parallel, drawn by Mei Lin herself, deeply resonates with Jian, validating the seriousness of her often misunderstood corporate battles. The emotional climate thickens during a quiet weekend they spend at the tea house overseeing the installation of new climate control systems, a project Mei Lin insisted upon to protect Jian's more delicate collection stored there. Amidst the hum of new machinery and the scent of fresh sealant, they share a meal that is decidedly not catered or rushed. Jian prepares a simple traditional dish, meticulously arranging the presentation with the same care he applies to ink wash. As they eat, the conversation drifts away from property disputes and market shares, touching instead on formative memories. Jian speaking of the painstaking, almost sacred duty instilled in him by his mentor, and Mei Lin hesitantly admitting that her relentless drive began when she realized her family relied entirely on her early financial success. These vulnerable admissions, offered without judgment in the protective silence of the old building, begin to dismantle the carefully constructed walls around both their hearts. The episode ends with them standing on the porch, looking out at the cityscape that Mei Lin dominates, and the ancient, hidden garden that Jian protects, a visual metaphor for the chasm they have successfully bridged, now standing at the precipice of something far more personal and potentially perilous. The shared quietude of that evening at the tea house leaves a palpable residue of intimacy that neither can easily shake off when they return to their respective spheres. Mei Lin finds the sterile efficiency of her modern apartment suddenly grating. The carefully curated art on her walls feels meaningless compared to the authentic patina of the aged wood in the tea house. She starts making small, almost unconscious adjustments to her routine. She begins leaving her phone face down during dinner, a small rebellion against the constant availability demanded by her executive role. Her focus at work remains razor-sharp, but the underlying tension, the constant preparation for the next attack, lessens slightly, replaced by a subtle, almost bewildered anticipation for the next scheduled meeting with Jian. Jian, meanwhile, finds his artistic concentration increasingly punctuated by thoughts of Mei Lin's sharp, intelligent assessments. He is working on a particularly difficult restoration, a large, fragmented screen painting where the original artist used a technique that has been lost to time. Initially, he approached it with his usual historical rigor, but now he finds himself employing some of Mei Lin's strategic thinking. Instead of only relying on archival evidence, he starts analyzing the market for similar techniques, theorizing about where the artist might have sourced materials or what contemporary trends might have influenced their deviation from tradition. He realizes that her analytical lens, once so offensive to his artistic sensibilities, can be a powerful tool for understanding context, even historical context. He even sketches out a brief, hypothetical proposal, detailing how the tea house could leverage its newfound cultural cachet for grants, using clear bullet points and projected returns, a direct echo of her style. Their next official meeting takes place in a neutral, high-end coffee house, a compromise location that leans slightly toward Mei Lin's modern preference, but allows Jian a degree of public anonymity. The discussion quickly moves past logistics when Jian presents his grant proposal, a document startlingly clear and persuasive. Mei Lin is genuinely impressed, not just by the content, but by the adoption of her structural language. She laughs softly, acknowledging the successful integration of their working styles, admitting that her attempts to understand the intricacies of pigment application have made her appreciate the true value of his specialized knowledge, far more than any corporate appraisal could convey. The emotional culmination arrives when they are forced to confront the future of the tea house itself. The initial legal victory only mandated shared custodianship, not ownership division. A local property appraiser, hired by a third party still interested in the land, suggests partitioning the property, a clear proposal to sell off the more valuable, commercially viable frontage while leaving Jian with the less desirable, older structure. Mei Lin explodes in defense of the integrity of the whole site, arguing passionately that separating the building destroys its historical continuity, using terms like symbiotic relationship and holistic value that she has clearly absorbed from Jian. Watching her fight so fiercely for something that offers her no direct financial gain, Jian understands the depth of her transformation. It isn't just about saving the property, it's about defending a principle they now share. As they leave the appraiser's office, the evening air thick with unspoken commitment, Jian stops her on the pavement, not to discuss legal strategy, but simply to thank her for seeing the value beyond the ledger book. The gesture is simple, but the weight of the shared vulnerability, the willingness to fight for something emotionally valued over purely monetary gain, marks the definitive crossing of the line, from colleagues to something much closer to allies in life. The shared commitment, forged in the face of the appraiser's cynical division proposal, ignites a deeper, more reckless curiosity between them. Their professional meetings, now almost entirely devoid of overt hostility, take on a charged atmosphere where every shared glance lingers a fraction too long. Mei Lin, having successfully deployed her executive skills to protect a piece of history, starts exploring the idea of integrating artistry into her own life, a concept previously deemed inefficient. She starts taking an evening class in figure drawing, an activity so far removed from spreadsheet analysis that it shocks her few close colleagues. She finds the struggle to accurately capture shadow and form deeply humbling, a stark contrast to the clean, definable metrics of her career. Her instructor, an older artist who emphasizes deliberate imperfection, often praises her discipline, but gently probes the rigidity in her posture, unknowingly echoing the precise critique Jian might offer regarding a poorly executed brushstroke. Jian recognizes the signs of Mei Lin pushing boundaries, not for profit, but for personal enrichment. He finds her vulnerability compelling. One afternoon, he stops by her office unannounced, bearing not documents, but a small, meticulously crafted wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a protective case he made for the antique fountain pen she uses exclusively for signing major corporate documents. The gesture is intimate, an artifact of care dedicated to her tools of power. Mei Lin accepts the box, her fingers brushing his briefly, and the physical contact sends a noticeable tremor through her composure. She confesses, almost breathlessly, that she feels like she is learning to breathe again, admitting that the relentless pursuit of success had inadvertently suffocated her capacity for genuine feeling, a sentiment that aligns perfectly with the quiet reverence Jian holds for preserved beauty. The city itself seems to conspire to bring them closer. A massive, unexpected power outage cripples the entire financial district, plunging Mei Lin's high-rise headquarters into darkness and chaos. Unable to rely on digital communication or even elevator access, Mei Lin is forced to navigate the emergency evacuation. Jian, who was waiting in the lobby to discuss a historical preservation report, immediately takes charge of directing other trapped individuals using calm, measured instructions, reverting to the steady authority he employs when managing delicate restorations under pressure. He guides Mei Lin down the emergency stairs, the shared descent through the dark tower becoming a profound metaphor for navigating uncertainty together. In the sudden, oppressive silence of the power failure, stripped of their usual technological shields, their conversation becomes raw and unguarded. Mei Lin speaks about the isolation of being the highest achiever, how every step up meant leaving more peers behind. When they finally reach the street level, blinking in the sudden, unregulated chaos, Jian points toward the faint, warm glow emanating from the distant, low-lying district where the tea house stands, one of the few areas that maintained auxiliary power due to its older, independent wiring systems. He suggests retreating there, away from the panicked gridlock. The invitation isn't professional. It's a mutual recognition that their shared sanctuary is the only place they can truly ground themselves. As they drive toward the quieter part of the city, the contrast between the darkened glass towers, symbols of Mei Lin's dominion, and the ancient, resilient structure waiting for them emphasizes the choice they are making. Prioritizing connection and history over the immediate demands of the high-stakes world they inhabit. The episode closes with them arriving at the tea house, the soft glow of paper lanterns illuminating Jian's face as he looks at Mei Lin, a look that clearly communicates a desire to move beyond the boundaries of their initial conflict and into the fragile territory of mutual affection. The retreat to the tea house during the blackout felt less like a tactical move and more like an inevitability, a physical manifestation of their emotional alignment. Once inside, under the soft, buttery light of the paper lanterns, lighting far more forgiving than the harsh LEDs of Mei Lin's world, the residual tension of the near disaster gave way to a deeper, quieter intimacy. Mei Lin, usually impeccably composed, found herself shedding the vestiges of her corporate armor. She pulled a heavy, aged woolen shawl, draped over an antique chair for purely aesthetic reasons by Jian, around her shoulders, savoring the unfamiliar softness and the subtle scent of cedar clinging to the fabric. It was a concession to comfort that would have been unthinkable a few months prior. Jian, relieved to see Mei Lin safe and slightly disarmed, took the opportunity to show her a different kind of artistry. Instead of working on a restoration, he guided her to the small, rarely used calligraphy room. He didn't lecture on technique. Instead, he simply dipped a brush into the inkstone and demonstrated the act of writing a single, flowing character representing peace or stillness. He explained that true mastery wasn't about flawless execution, but about the flow of energy from the mind, through the arm to the tip of the brush, a concept that resonated deeply with Mei Lin's understanding of market momentum. She watched his hand move with hypnotic grace, realizing that his entire career was dedicated to capturing ephemeral moments in permanent form, a concept far more profound than capturing quarterly profits. When she finally took the brush, guided gently by his hand over hers, a touch that felt both proprietary and deeply respectful, her first character was a rigid, angular mess, a perfect reflection of her pressurized existence. Jian didn't criticize. He simply pointed out where the energy had stopped, where she had clamped down too hard. He encouraged her to breathe into the movement. As she tried again, focusing not on the outcome but on the process, the character softened, gaining a rudimentary elegance. This shared, creative vulnerability proved more connecting than any successful legal maneuver. The next morning, the power grid flickered back to life, flooding the modern sections of the city with harsh, familiar light. The moment the emergency felt over, the unspoken promise of the night hung heavy between them. As they prepared to leave the tea house and re-enter their separate domains, the air was thick with the recognition that they could no longer simply return to their previous roles. Mei Lin paused at the door, turning back to Jian. She didn't mention mergers or assets. Instead, she referenced the difficult screen painting he was working on, suggesting a material science expert she knew in her network who specialized in rare historical dyes, an offer that was purely altruistic, leveraging her resources for his passion. Jian met her gaze, his usual reserve momentarily broken by an open acknowledgement of his feelings. He didn't offer a thank you. Instead, he stepped forward and gently adjusted the collar of her expensive silk blouse, a small, domestic gesture of care utterly foreign to their professional interactions. The gesture spoke volumes about the blurring lines. As Mei Lin drove away, back toward the steel and glass monuments of her ambition, she clutched the wooden pen box on the passenger seat, realizing that the most valuable asset she had secured wasn't the tea house deed, but the unexpected, fragile alliance with the man who understood that true preservation required both meticulous technique and a willingness to let go of absolute control. The episode concludes with the understanding that their interwoven lives are now unavoidable. They have built a shared structure, a fragile masterpiece, that neither is willing to let fall apart. The shift from strategic partnership to genuine emotional entanglement becomes increasingly evident in the following days, marked by subtle yet significant disruptions to their established routines. Mei Lin, having tasted the grounding effect of the tea house and the unexpected satisfaction of creative effort, begins viewing her high-stakes corporate world with a newly critical eye. During a board meeting concerning the acquisition of a rival firm, a deal that would cement her position as a top executive, she finds herself distracted. Instead of focusing on the projected revenue streams, her mind keeps returning to the subtle, almost imperceptible crack in the lacquer of Jian's favorite inkstone, which she knows he intends to repair next week. This distraction isn't weakness. Rather, it's a realignment of priorities, where the integrity of an aesthetic object now rivals the integrity of a financial portfolio in her internal valuation system. She subtly steers the conversation away from aggressive takeover tactics toward a more collaborative, long-term integration strategy, echoing the careful, patient approach Jian uses with ancient paper, much to the confusion of her hardened subordinates. Jian, feeling the pull of Mei Lin's genuine interest in his work, faces a new kind of internal conflict. He has always believed that the purity of art demands detachment from the messy realities of commerce. However, Mei Lin's offer to connect him with the dye specialist forces him to admit that his dedication to purity sometimes verges on self-sabotage. Accepting her help means acknowledging the power of her world, the very world he long scorned as superficial. He visits the specialist, a chemist who speaks in molecular terms rather than historical anecdotes, and is stunned by the precision they can offer. This exposure to cutting-edge analytical science applied to ancient materials makes him question his own adherence to purely artisanal methods. He realizes that Mei Lin isn't just offering connections, she's offering evolution for his craft, an idea that excites and terrifies him in equal measure, as it means trusting his future to the very forces he sought to escape. The inevitable merging of their personal schedules forces them into a larger public setting for the first time. Mei Lin is obliged to attend a highly publicized charity gala celebrating the city's cultural patrons, an event where her presence signifies corporate endorsement. She invites Jian not as a date, but as an expert on historical significance, providing him with an entry point into a social circle that would normally only recognize him through appraisal fees. Jian arrives uncomfortable in borrowed formal wear, a master craftsman feeling acutely out of place among financiers and socialites. However, when Mei Lin introduces him, she doesn't present him as her consultant. She speaks of him as a guardian of the city's soul, her voice imbued with the conviction he first heard during the tea house dispute. For the first time, Jian feels seen not just as an artisan, but as a necessary cultural anchor. The night culminates in a moment of accidental intimacy amidst the glittering crowd. A rival executive, attempting to flatter Mei Lin, makes a dismissive remark about the sentimental value of antique preservation versus real investment. Before Mei Lin can formulate her polished corporate retort, Jane steps forward. With quiet authority that silences the surrounding chatter, he doesn't argue about money. He speaks of the irreplaceable knowledge lost when an original technique vanishes, using the analogy of a proprietary algorithm being deleted forever, a reference he knows Mei Lin will grasp instantly. The room is momentarily stunned by the force of his defense, rooted in both art and logic. Later, away from the noise, Standing near the terrace overlooking the illuminated city, Mei Lin looks at him with a gaze that strips away all pretense. She doesn't need to speak about their shared property or future projects. In that moment, surrounded by the superficial glamour she masters, she realizes that Jian's grounded authenticity is the most valuable commodity she has ever encountered, and the unspoken acknowledgement between them shifts from mutual respect to undeniable burgeoning desire, setting the stage for the tangible risks of a romantic commitment. The air at the gala, thick with expensive perfume and competitive ambition, crackled with an entirely new energy, following Jian's impromptu defense of historical value. Mei Lin felt a profound sense of pride, an emotion unlinked to stock prices or shareholder approval. It was the pride of watching someone you respect succeed, amplified by the recognition that his victory was subtly, or perhaps not so subtly, her victory too, as she had championed his presence there. As they left the suffocating opulence of the ballroom, the transition back to the relative anonymity of the street felt like a necessary exhale. The next morning, the professional veneer was thinner than ever. Mei Lin initiated contact not via encrypted corporate email, but through a personal text message suggesting they meet at the tea house to discuss the feasibility of using the dye specialist's lab for Jian's screen painting, a completely plausible work-related reason that carried the unspoken weight of wanting to spend time together. Jian responded immediately, agreeing, but added a single, uncharacteristic line: "Bring your drawing pad." When Mei Lin arrived, she found Jian not in his usual workshop, but meticulously cleaning the exterior of the main gate, which had been subtly marred by a recent storm. He was engaged in physical labor, using simple soap and water, a method far removed from the chemical precision he'd explored with the specialist. He explained, wiping his brow, that sometimes the most profound restoration requires the least intervention, relying only on patience and presence. This simple, grounded activity was a stark counterpoint to the frantic pace of her previous day. They settled in the main room. Mei Lin, true to her word, brought her sketch pad. She didn't attempt high art. Instead, she sketched Jian, capturing the intensity in his eyes as he analyzed the subtle weathering on the wood grain. It was a study in focused concentration, an honest attempt to render complexity onto a flat surface. Jian watched her for a long moment, not critiquing the lines, but observing the slight flush in her cheeks, the tension leaving her shoulders as she sketched. He saw the executive allowing herself to be vulnerable through creation, a transformation more significant than any business acquisition. The conversation turned to the future of the tea house, no longer a point of contention, but a shared commitment. They discussed installing sustainable power sources, something Mei Lin championed for efficiency, and Jian supported for its minimal environmental impact, a rare, perfect convergence of their philosophies. During this planning session, Mei Lin admitted, with uncharacteristic candor, that the thought of returning to a purely solitary existence in her penthouse felt increasingly desolate. Jian, responding not with flowery romanticism, but with the steady assurance of a man who understands permanence, simply said that some structures, whether built of brick or shared trust, were meant to support weight together. The episode concludes as they walk through the small, overgrown garden behind the tea house, a space Jian had always kept private. He points out a particularly resilient climbing rose, one that survived years of neglect before he painstakingly nurtured it back to health. As they stand amidst the evening shadows, the air cooler and cleaner than the city smog, Mei Lin finally closes the gap between them. It isn't a dramatic declaration. She simply reaches out, taking his hand, the hand that both restores the past and anchors the present. Jian turns, his expression one of quiet affirmation, and lifts her hand to his lips, a gesture steeped in both the reverence of an art restorer honoring a delicate find and the genuine affection of a man realizing he has found his essential counterweight. The conflict is resolved. The narrative turns toward the delicate, challenging act of building a shared future where ambition and sentiment must learn to coexist. The quiet intimacy established in the garden, sealed by that tentative hand-holding, immediately raises the stakes for their next interactions. The boundary between shared custody of the tea house and shared custody of each other's emotions has effectively dissolved. Mei Lin returns to the corporate world physically, but her mental landscape is irrevocably altered. She begins incorporating subtle aesthetic touches into her often harsh environment. The stark white walls of her office are softened by a single, perfectly balanced calligraphic print Jian gifted her, a character that apparently symbolizes endurance. Her colleagues notice the shift, interpreting it as either a strategic move toward corporate social responsibility or perhaps a sign of unexpected burnout, unable to conceive that their relentless leader is softening due to genuine human connection. Jian, inspired by Mei Lin's commitment to incorporating his world into hers, decides to bridge the gap further by engaging directly with a minor aspect of her professional sphere. He agrees to consult, purely as an expert on material longevity, for Mei Lin's tech firm regarding the archival integrity of their newest data storage casings, suggesting that true innovation must also consider permanence. During this consultation, he is forced to confront the language of obsolescence and rapid iteration, systems utterly antithetical to his life's work. Yet, watching Mei Lin command the room, translating complex structural vulnerabilities into concise, actionable directives for her engineers, he sees a terrifying, beautiful efficiency. He realizes her drive isn't about accumulating wealth. It's about creating enduring structures in a world obsessed with the temporary, a pursuit he deeply respects, even if the medium is silicon rather than silk. The inherent difficulty of maintaining their separate lives becomes a central theme. Mei Lin cancels a crucial dinner meeting with a major international investor because Jian has finally sourced a specific, rare type of protective lacquer needed for the screen painting, requiring his immediate presence at the supplier's remote workshop. When the investor calls her out on the unprecedented rescheduling, Mei Lin doesn't offer a weak excuse. She states with cool finality that a vital preservation project requires her oversight, a statement that shocks the investor into silence. This prioritization signals to the outside world, and crucially to Jian, that her commitment to him and the shared values embodied by the tea house now outweigh even significant financial opportunities. This decision sparks a necessary confrontation about their futures. Back at the tea house, while the new power systems hum quietly, the conversation turns unavoidable. Jian lays out his core fear. His life is anchored in the past, in careful conservation. Hers is defined by constant, aggressive movement into the future. He asks, genuinely anxious, how they can possibly merge two timelines that seem structurally incompatible. Mei Lin responds not with a calculated strategy, but with raw honesty, admitting that she often feels like she is running so fast she is about to fly off the edge of the map. She looks at the old structure, then at him, and proposes a radical synthesis. She will use her business acumen to secure endowments and foundations, effectively professionalizing the preservation work at the tea house, thereby giving his passion the financial stability he always feared asking for. In return, she asks only that he continue to be her anchor, the place she can retreat to find stillness, assuring him that she is learning how to slow down her own internal clock. The episode closes as they finally embrace fully, no longer tentative touches, but a mutual grounding. The high-powered executive and the meticulous artisan have found a shared ground, built not on compromise, but on a complementary vision of permanence, accepting that their love story will be one of delicate balancing between relentless forward motion and deep historical reverence. The opening episode of Faded Hearts immediately establishes a tone of quiet yearning set against the backdrop of Seoul's relentlessly competitive arts scene. We are introduced to Han Seo-jun, a violinist whose technical brilliance is only rivaled by the suffocating pressure he internalizes. His father's legacy as a celebrated but emotionally distant conductor looms large, shaping Seo-jun's interpretation of music not as expression, but as flawless execution demanded by an unseen, critical audience. The tension in his practice room, sterile and acoustically perfect, mirrors the emotional sterility of his life. His ambition is less about personal fulfillment and more about honoring a bloodline, a burden that manifests in the tightness of his bow grip and the almost painful precision of his vibrato. It's clear from his interactions, polite, distant, professional, that connection is a luxury he cannot afford if he wishes to maintain his elite status. Contrast this with Kang Ji-woo, the narrative's emotional anchor, a contemporary dancer whose career path offers a different kind of struggle. Ji-woo operates within a world that values raw vulnerability and narrative depth, attributes that often clash with the rigid structures of classical music fandom. Her recent move from a small provincial troupe to a prestigious Seoul company suggests a fierce internal drive, perhaps rooted in a desire to prove that her artistry is valid on the national stage. The episode subtly hints at past sacrifices, a missed opportunity, or a difficult choice that fuel her current tenacity. When she dances, even in a simple rehearsal space, there is an uncontained energy, a willingness to fall and rise that Seo-jun's world seems engineered to suppress. Her contemporary style emphasizes groundedness and emotional honesty, qualities that seem entirely absent from the polished facade Seo-jun maintains. The initial convergence of their worlds occurs not over a shared artistic vision, but through a pragmatic necessity, a collaborative project bridging classical music and modern movement, a pairing that feels deliberately engineered by their respective managements to generate buzz. This forced proximity is the engine of the early narrative. Seo-jun approaches the collaboration with the detachment of a contractor fulfilling a brief. He views Ji-woo's improvisational approach as chaos needing structure. Ji-woo, conversely, sees his music as a cage, beautiful but restrictive, and attempts to break it open with her physicality. A key scene involves a difficult rehearsal where Seo-jun stops playing mid-movement, frustrated by Ji-woo's interpretation of a particularly mournful passage. His critique focuses on tempo and metric accuracy, while her response is centered on feeling, the weight of the silence between the notes. This exchange perfectly encapsulates their fundamental dissonance, the technician versus the empath. Yet, within this conflict, the first spark of genuine interest ignites. Seo-jun, despite himself, is intrigued by the way Ji-woo physically embodies the emotion he can only articulate through flawless execution. Ji-woo, perhaps for the first time, encounters a musician whose technical mastery demands she push beyond her own physical limitations to meet his sound. The episode concludes by laying the groundwork for the romantic entanglement, suggesting that their connection will develop not through grand gestures, but through the slow, arduous process of mutual artistic understanding. The setting leans heavily on muted color palettes when focusing on Seo-jun, emphasizing his isolation, while Ji-woo's scenes benefit from warmer, more natural lighting, suggesting untapped potential. Fated Hearts, Episode 1 successfully uses the demanding worlds of classical music and contemporary dance as fertile ground for exploring themes of authenticity, inherited pressure, and the transformative power of finding someone who can speak your unspoken language, even if that language is initially expressed through opposing artistic dialects. The narrative's early insistence on the stark differences between Seo-jun and Ji-woo serves to heighten the eventual emotional collision. Seo-jun's dedication to the violin isn't merely professional, it's an act of penance. His inspiration, or perhaps his curse, lies in the shadow of his father, whose every composition and performance review Seo-jun pores over, searching for the key to elusive paternal approval. This archival research keeps him perpetually looking backward, unable to chart his own course. When he finally allows his gaze to linger on Ji-woo during a rehearsal, it's not admiration that first surfaces, but a flicker of recognition. She moves with the uninhibited emotionality he was systematically trained to excise from his own performance. He envies the freedom she wears like a second skin. Ji-woo's journey into dance stemmed from a necessity for self-expression that conventional schooling stifled. Her training, characterized by rigorous conditioning in a smaller, more intimate regional setting, valued the narrative embedded in the body over sheer acrobatic display. She speaks of choreographers who treated movement as storytelling, insisting that the dancer must bleed onto the stage. This backstory explains her impatience with Seo-jun's academic approach to their score. She views his meticulous adherence to the written music as a shield, a barrier against genuine feeling. In their early interactions, when she presses him to play with more hunger, she is essentially asking him to shed his armor. Her own frustration manifests as a slight tremor in her hands after particularly exhausting contemporary sequences, a physical toll she accepts as the price of authenticity, a price Seo-jun seems terrified to pay. The environment surrounding them reinforces these internal states. Seo-jun's apartment is minimalist to the point of austerity, dominated by the gleaming, impassive wood of his instrument case, which resembles a sarcophagus more than a travel accessory. His few personal effects suggest a life lived primarily within performance halls and soundproofed spaces. Conversely, Ji-woo's small studio apartment, glimpsed briefly as she rushes out, is cluttered with sketches, crumpled drafts of movement notations, and perhaps a worn photograph of an older mentor, suggesting a rich, if financially modest, life sustained by community and shared passion. The specific piece they are struggling to harmonize, a sweeping, late romantic concerto, is revealing. It demands both Seo-jun's formidable technical prowess and a soaring emotional arc. He plays the notes flawlessly, hitting every dynamic marking, but the music remains earthbound. Ji-woo's response is visceral. She doesn't merely interpret the notes. She physically embodies the emotional decay suggested by the minor key shifts. During one breakthrough moment, catalyzed by Ji-woo deliberately allowing her movement to become momentarily clumsy, almost breaking the rhythm, Seo-jun instinctively softens his attack, allowing a note to decay naturally into silence rather than cutting it off cleanly. This micro-adjustment, unnoticed by anyone else, is monumental for him. It's the first time his muscle memory has ceded control to an external emotional cue. This small fissure in his perfectionism opens the door for a shared vulnerability, suggesting that the true drama of this pairing will lie in whether Seo-jun can learn to embrace artistic imperfection as a pathway to emotional connection, and whether Ji-woo can find the discipline within his structure to give her own powerful expression lasting form. The development of their forced collaboration begins to reveal deeper layers of Seo-jun's internal landscape. We see subtle indications that his father's influence extends beyond mere musical expectation, into the realm of personal relationships. In a brief, tension-filled phone call with his manager, Xia exhibits a chilling level of control, his voice modulated to convey absolute competence while masking profound loneliness. The manager's careful phrasing, mentioning the public perception of Xia dedication, suggests that his career is being managed less as an art form and more as a fragile commodity requiring constant, meticulous polishing. This environment has bred in Xia an acute sensitivity to scrutiny, making Jiwoo's open, often messy process feel like an exposé. Jiwoo, meanwhile, reveals a history of navigating complex power dynamics through her body language. A flashback, perhaps a memory triggered by a harsh word from a demanding choreographer, shows her as a younger dancer, physically shrinking under observation. This past experience fuels her current determination to occupy space fully. She doesn't just dance. She claims the air around her, a direct rebellion against any force that has tried to diminish her presence. Her connection to her art is almost shamanistic. When she studies the score Xia provides, she is not reading notes, but mapping out emotional geography. She sketches small, furious stick figures onto the margins of the printed music, visualizing where the sound needs to break or swell. The core conflict escalates when they move to blocking a section of the performance that requires synchronized, sustained eye contact. For Xia, holding that gaze is harder than executing the most difficult arpeggio. His eyes, usually focused intensely on the music stand or his violin's scroll, dart away from Jiwoo, betraying a deep-seated fear of true intimacy. The fear that if someone truly sees him, they will only see the hollow imitation of the musician his father wanted. Jiwoo interprets his averted gaze as arrogance or artistic aloofness, further solidifying her initial judgment of him as emotionally bankrupt. However, a moment of unexpected grace arrives during an evening rehearsal that stretches late into the soul night. They are working on a passage that requires near silence, where the music fades to the sound of a single, sustained violin tone. Jiwoo, exhausted, sinks into a slow, deliberate collapse, her descent mirroring the dying vibration of the note. Xia, instead of stopping when the music technically ends, lets the tone linger until Jiwoo's movement is complete. When he finally lowers his bow, the silence that follows is different. It is shared, expectant, not empty. He offers her a bottle of water, a gesture so small and purely practical that it bypasses his usual guards. Jiwoo accepts it, meeting his eyes this time without challenge, seeing the exhaustion behind the discipline. This episode marks the transition from professional conflict to nascent, fragile understanding, suggesting that their shared passion, despite their vastly different methods, might just be strong enough to build a bridge across the chasm separating their established worlds. The tension is no longer purely about art, but about the perilous act of letting down defenses for the sake of creation and perhaps connection. The nascent understanding forged in that late-night rehearsal proves to be a volatile foundation, as the pressures of their respective careers immediately threaten to pull them back into their isolated orbits. Xia returns to the sterile environment of his concert preparation, where the weight of his next major recital looms, a performance often cited in music journals as his defining moment since his early competition wins. His world dictates a strict adherence to routine, physiotherapy for his wrists, detailed score analysis, and mandatory, often superficial, social engagements designed to cultivate a public image of effortless genius. During these mandated appearances, Jiwoo is conspicuously absent, and Xia finds himself fielding pointed questions about the unorthodox nature of his collaboration, thinly veiled critiques of his deviation from the expected classical path. He defends the project with a practiced coolness, but inwardly, the memory of Ji-woo's expressive, unconstrained movement serves as a disturbing reminder of the emotional spontaneity he lacks. Ji-woo experiences an equally sharp jolt upon returning to her company's full schedule. Her director, a formidable veteran known for demanding absolute allegiance to the company's established aesthetic, senses the shift in Ji-woo's focus. The director critiques a new choreography sequence, accusing Ji-woo of introducing a stiffness into her transitions, a subtle but noticeable borrowing of classical precision that dilutes the raw, earthy quality the director prizes. This critique forces Ji-woo to confront the danger of assimilation. She realizes that engaging with Seo-jun's world risks corrupting the very essence of her own hard-won artistic identity. She begins to actively compartmentalize their work, treating their rehearsals as a separate, almost illicit space, fearing that any visible blending of their styles will invite scrutiny and condemnation from her peers. The next planned meeting takes place outside the usual rehearsal halls, perhaps in a neutral public space like a quiet park near a river, symbolizing a temporary escape from their professional structures. This shift in setting allows for a vulnerability not possible under the harsh lights of the studio. Seo-jun, unburdened by his violin, appears physically lighter, though still guarded. Ji-woo, seeing him without the imposing presence of his instrument, probes gently about his childhood, not about music theory, but about what brought him joy before the baton of expectation was placed in his hand. He deflects initially, offering anecdotes about mastering difficult passages, but then, unexpectedly, he speaks of his mother, a pianist who faded from public life after marrying his father, mentioning her quiet preference for folk melodies over symphonies. This single shared memory of musical longing, a desire for something simpler and less perfect, creates an authentic point of contact. The episode culminates not in physical affection, but in a shared, spontaneous act of creation mirroring their burgeoning emotional state. While walking, Ji-woo notices the rhythm of the city traffic, the harsh braking sounds, the consistent hum of the subway beneath the pavement. Without a word, she begins to move, a series of sharp, angular gestures translating the urban dissonance into kinetic energy. Instead of being analytical or critical, Seo-jun listens, and for the first time, he doesn't try to structure her movement. Instead, he mimics a sound he hears, a sharp, sustained car horn, by humming a perfect, piercingly pure pitch, an improvised counterpoint that serves as the sonic anchor for her chaotic movement. They are, for a fleeting moment, perfectly in sync, creating something entirely new that belongs solely to them, acknowledging that their connection exists in the gaps between their established careers, in the sounds and movements they dared to steal from the outside world. The shared, spontaneous creation in the park, though brief and electrifying, introduces a new dimension of anxiety, the fear of externalizing their nascent connection. Seo-jun, horrified by his public humming, an act so uncharacteristic of his rigorously controlled public persona, immediately retreats upon noticing a pair of music students observing them with curiosity. His reaction is swift and almost violent in its repression. He snaps back into his default mode of impassive professionalism, offering Ji-woo a curt nod before practically fleeing the scene. This swift emotional retraction highlights the deeply ingrained nature of his self-censorship. The moment genuine, unscripted emotion surfaces, the instinct to barricade himself returns with overwhelming force. He fears that this raw expression, which felt liberating in the moment, will be interpreted by the gatekeepers of his career as instability, a threat to the polished narrative he has so carefully constructed since childhood. Ji Woo, witnessing this sudden withdrawal, feels a familiar sting of rejection, reminiscent of past instances where vulnerability was met with dismissal. Her initial hurt morphs into sharp frustration. She interprets his retreat not as fear, but as confirmation of her early suspicion that he is ultimately incapable of prioritizing genuine feeling over the demands of his legacy. For her, art is an offering. For him, it seems to be a fortress. She seeks him out the following day at the University Music Hall, not to apologize for the public display, but to challenge his silence. She finds him in a deserted practice room, meticulously polishing the wood of his violin, treating the instrument with an almost religious reverence. Ji Woo doesn't shout. Instead, she adopts a low, intensely focused tone, questioning whether he even values the potential of their collaboration, or if he sees it merely as a necessary hurdle before his next solo triumph. Her probing forces Xia Meng to articulate the source of his rigidity, though still obliquely. He speaks not of his father, but of the relentless pursuit of perfection required to remain at the apex of classical performance, comparing the standard to scaling a sheet of ice. One wrong move, and the fall is catastrophic. He reveals a detail about his practice routine. He sleeps with his violin case open beside his bed, a subconscious reassurance that the source of his identity and security is always within reach. This detail speaks volumes about his underlying insecurity. He needs the physical presence of his career to anchor him, even in sleep. Ji Woo responds to this admission of dependency with unexpected empathy, recognizing the architecture of fear that built his career. She recounts a period of intense self-doubt after a fall during a major competition early in her career, where her ankle injury forced her to abandon movement for 6 months. During that enforced stillness, she learned to listen, truly listen, to the sounds of the world, without the need to immediately translate them into motion. It was in that silence, she explains, that she rediscovered the why behind her dancing. This shared acknowledgement of past professional trauma creates a delicate pivot point. They are no longer just technician versus empath. They are two artists scarred by the same industry, albeit in different ways. The episode closes as Xia Meng, perhaps influenced by Ji Woo's story of finding art in stillness, invites her to sit beside him, not to discuss music, but to simply exist in the quiet space, a significant concession that suggests he might finally be willing to share the silence without feeling the compulsive need to fill it with notes. The invitation to simply exist in the quiet space marks a significant, if tentative, shift in the dynamic, moving their relationship from forced artistic engagement to hesitant personal recognition. Xia Meng's willingness to share the silence is an act of profound vulnerability for him. It means pausing the relentless internal metronome that dictates his every action. He observes Ji Woo sitting beside him, her posture still imbued with the coiled energy of a dancer, but relaxed enough to allow the tension around her eyes to soften. He notices small details about her that his focused musical attention usually overlooks: the slight discoloration on her thumbnail from excessive rosin use, the way she instinctively stretches her calves even while seated. These mundane realities contrast sharply with the idealized, untouchable perfection he seeks in his own performances. Ji Woo, sensing the fragile nature of this truce, refrains from pushing for immediate emotional disclosure. Instead, she directs their conversation toward the external world, perhaps pointing out a particularly beautiful or tragic interaction she observed on the street. A couple arguing intensely, a street musician playing with fervent abandon, asking Xia Meng for his reading of the soundscape. This prompts Xia Meng to use his analytical ear in a new context. He identifies the harmonic relationship between the distant ambulance siren and the rhythmic pounding of a construction site, analyzing them not as noise pollution, but as competing melodic lines. This intellectual exercise allows him to participate without exposing his core self, providing a safe bridge for communication. He speaks with an unexpected clarity about the physics of sound, the way vibrations affect the body, concepts rooted in science, but now applied to raw human experience. The episode subtly underscores the divergent career trajectories that continue to pull them apart. Ji-woo receives news that her contemporary piece is being considered for a European festival, a career milestone that requires intense focus on developing a cohesive, personal choreographic voice independent of external influences. Conversely, Seo-jun is informed that his upcoming recital will feature a new, rarely performed composition by his late grandfather, a piece steeped in family history and immense technical difficulty, a move clearly engineered by his management to reinforce his commitment to the classical lineage and perhaps distract from his recent unorthodox collaboration. The pressure of fulfilling an inherited masterwork clashes directly with the open-ended potential he glimpsed with Ji-woo. Their growing intimacy is complicated by the presence of secondary characters who serve as external reflections of their internal conflicts. We see a brief, sharp interaction between Seo-jun and a rival violinist, perhaps someone who succeeded where Seo-jun felt he fell short in his youth. This rival's easy confidence and apparent lack of internal struggle serve to immediately reignite Seo-jun's self-doubt, making him question if Ji-woo's influence is weakening his competitive edge. On Ji-woo's side, a seasoned dancer from her company expresses subtle disapproval of her newfound absorption in their collaboration, suggesting that true contemporary artists must remain uncompromised by the tyranny of the score. These external judgments act as mirrors, reflecting back the precise fears each protagonist holds about sacrificing authenticity for connection, or, conversely, sacrificing connection for artistic purity. The episode leaves them at a precipice. They have found a shared language in the neutral space between classical rigor and free expression, but the monolithic demands of their respective artistic destinies are now closing in, threatening to crush the fragile bridge they have built. The pressure cooker environment surrounding their impending major performances forces a confrontation between the abstract understanding they've reached and the concrete reality of their professional obligations. Seo-jun's immersion in his grandfather's formidable concerto requires an almost monastic isolation. He locks himself away, the faint smell of aged sheet music and rosin clinging to his apartment. During this intense isolation, Ji-woo becomes a haunting, intrusive thought. He finds himself subconsciously altering his articulation of a difficult passage, unconsciously shaping a bowing technique to mimic the sustained curve of Ji-woo's extended arm in one of her signature poses. This unintentional artistic plagiarism both thrills and terrifies him. It's the most honest music he's played in years, yet it's entirely uncredited and dangerously outside the established interpretation. Ji-woo, meanwhile, channels the creative tension into her own work, using the frustration of Seo-jun's recent emotional withdrawal as kinetic fuel. Her choreography for the European festival begins to take shape, heavily featuring moments of sudden stasis, dancers freezing mid-leap, suspended by palpable tension, a direct physical echo of Seo-jun's disciplined halts. However, this intense channeling of their unresolved dynamic also leads to mistakes. In a moment of exhaustion, she attempts a highly difficult lift sequence fueled by adrenaline rather than preparation, and nearly suffers a serious injury, only saved by the quick reaction of a company mate. This near accident serves as a brutal wake-up call. Her art, while emotionally necessary, cannot afford the same lack of technical safety net that Xia Meng's career relies upon. The stakes of her vulnerability are physical, immediate, and unforgiving. The narrative brings them together again, under the guise of necessity. A required press event for the collaborative project, designed by management to showcase their artistic synergy just weeks before their individual showcases. The setting is brightly lit, overly formal, and intensely performative, the antithesis of their meaningful park encounter. During the Q&A session, a journalist directly questions Jiwoo about whether Xia Meng's classical discipline has tamed her improvisational spirit. Before Jiwoo can formulate a diplomatic answer, Xia Meng intervenes, not with a practiced platitude, but with unexpected candor. He defends her energy, stating that her freedom is not chaos, but an essential counterbalance to the inherent rigidity of the music they share. He uses the metaphor of air pressure. Without her movement to push against, my sound would collapse inward upon itself. This public defense, spoken with genuine conviction, is the first time he has publicly prioritized her artistic perspective over the narrative dictated by his management. The culmination of this episode occurs as they leave the press event. The carefully maintained facade cracks under the stress of public scrutiny. Jiwoo, emboldened by his defense, gently asks if he would consider incorporating one small, spontaneous, unwritten element, something uniquely theirs, into his highly traditional recital piece. Xia Meng hesitates, the weight of his grandfather's legacy visible in the tightening of his jaw. He doesn't give a definitive yes or no, but instead, in a gesture steeped in unspoken meaning, he reaches out and momentarily touches the small, silver ankle bracelet Jiwoo always wears, a piece of jewelry he has observed her tracing with her hand during moments of anxiety. It is a fleeting, non-verbal contract, acknowledging that whatever happens on stage, the music they have made together, however hidden, has irrevocably altered his performance, and, perhaps, his path forward. The episode ends on this lingering touch, pregnant with the implication that Xia Meng is preparing to risk everything built on tradition for the sake of one moment of shared, authentic truth. The near contact with the ankle bracelet, a symbol of Jiwoo's grounding presence, sends a palpable wave of anxiety through Xia Meng as he retreats to the hyperstructured world of his final recital preparations. The concerto is now less a piece of music and more a cage of his ancestors' expectations. He practices the difficult cadenza, the one notoriously prone to technical lapses under pressure, but instead of focusing solely on the finger positions, his mind keeps overlaying Jiwoo's flowing, almost liquid choreography onto the stiff, predictable score markings. He finds himself deliberately introducing a slight hesitation before a major shift in dynamics, mimicking the pregnant pause Jiwoo held before a difficult rotation. This alteration, however subtle, feels like a massive act of treason against the precise musical heritage he's supposed to uphold. The very act of performing the piece now feels less like honoring his grandfather and more like a negotiation with Jiwoo's spirit. Jiwoo, buoyed by Xia Meng's public defense, but unsettled by his nonverbal contract, throws herself into refining the European piece. The near fall has instilled a new respect for boundaries, but also an increased urgency to translate her raw feeling into something permanent and undeniable. She channels the memory of Xia Meng's humming in the park, that pure, unsupported tone, into a sequence of slow, sustained balances that demand absolute inner stillness. She realizes that for her art to survive the high-pressure environment of international festivals, it needs a spine, a structural integrity that perhaps only the discipline she previously scorned can provide. She begins sketching simplified rhythmic patterns in the margins of her rehearsal notes, not as choreography, but as percussive breath patterns, a physical transcription of musical structure. The final rehearsal before the recital becomes a silent barometer of their developing connection. Xia arrives, exhausted but strangely calm, bringing not his violin, but a small, exquisitely bound book of Japanese poetry that Jiwoo had once mentioned admiring in a bookstore window. He doesn't explain the gift, he simply places it on the corner of her practice mat. This act bypasses words entirely, acknowledging her interests outside the immediate context of their collaboration. During their run-through of the collaborative piece, there is a palpable difference. Xia still executes the music with precision, but the sound is now layered with a deeper resonance. He breathes with the phrasing, allowing the notes to decay naturally, embodying the weight of silence Jiwoo had initially demanded. Jiwoo responds by allowing her movements to become cleaner, her extensions reaching further, supported by the sonic scaffolding he is finally providing. The climax of the episode centers on the moment of maximum connection during this rehearsal. As they reach the peak emotional arc of the score, Jiwoo executes a full extension, holding the pose for several beats longer than necessary, completely trusting the continuation of the music. Xia, rather than being thrown off by the unexpected extension of time, effortlessly elongates the final chord, holding the note until Jiwoo subtly signals her release with a slight tremor of her fingertips. This is not collaboration. It is synchronization born of deep, nonverbal understanding. As the sound finally fades, they remain locked in that moment of shared breath. Xia offers a ghost of a smile, one that hasn't touched his lips in years, acknowledging that by risking one moment of pure, unscripted expression in his recital, he is not betraying his heritage, but finally making it truly his own. The audience is left anticipating the recital, not to see if he can play perfectly, but to see if he dares to let his newfound vulnerability resonate through the established framework of classical mastery. The eve of Seojun's defining recital is thick with unspoken tension, a highly charged atmosphere that mirrors the delicate balance he attempts to strike between legacy and personal truth. His management team circles him like hawks, reinforcing the narrative of unflinching adherence to tradition. They have meticulously curated the press coverage, focusing exclusively on his technical mastery and the historical significance of the grandfather's concerto, effectively erasing any public mention of the contemporary dance collaboration. Xia navigates these final meetings with an unnerving, almost robotic calm, using his practiced detachment as a shield against the rising tide of nerves. He studies the score one last time, the pages worn soft by generations of demanding hands, and the location where he intends to introduce his subtle deviation, a mere half-beat shift in tempo during the second movement's most technically demanding section, feels like a potential detonator. Jiwoo, preparing for her own festival showcase, finds herself in the strange position of being Seojun's most ardent, yet most distant supporter. Her company demands complete focus on her choreography, viewing any distraction as a dereliction of duty. Yet she cannot concentrate. Instead of running her routines, she finds herself pacing the perimeter of her studio, performing small, repetitive gestures of anxiety, twisting the silver bracelet on her ankle, mimicking the tight grip Seojun uses on his bow. She understands the magnitude of what he is attempting, to introduce organic imperfection into an object of veneration. For her, success is about pushing boundaries. For him, it is about subtly bending them without shattering the structure, holding him aloft. She sends him a single text message hours before the performance, not about the music, but a quote from the book of poetry he gave her, a line about finding vastness in a single, captured moment, a permission slip, if he needed one. The concert hall itself is immense, a cathedral of high culture, where